Hello, everyone. My name is Huai, and this is my collective action project, focusing on global social movements to target the issue of food insecurity. Why did I pick this topic? It's because I witnessed it growing up in my local community. I'm from a rural district in Vietnam, and there was a lot of poor people, there was a lot of homeless people, and it was interesting because people didn't really ask for money, but they asked for food. Now, my family was poor, but we didn't experience food insecurity. So we donated rice whenever we could. This was in the 90s. We're now in the 21st century. And according to UNICEF data, almost 690 million people around the world went hungry in 2019. So this issue is still very much real in this day and age. And because it has particular importance with me, I wish to use this opportunity to discuss policy analysis, social movements, programming interventions, so we can collectively reduce the number of people who are vulnerable to food insecurity, one appetite at a time. To approach this topic, I began by examining the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are 17 interlinked goals, whose mission reads, a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all by 2030. Within these 17, I will be focusing specifically on Goal 2, which is UN SDG 2 Zero Hunger. And to meet the objective, the UN has partnered with the World Food Program, which is the world's largest humanitarian organization, and it's also the largest one focused on food security. And this this angle, this approach, this social movement would be categorized under social reform movements because the issue of food security is not anything that is radical. These institutions are advocating for a minor change, which is access to food for more people, but this small change would produce a very meaningful difference. The World Food Program has successfully bureaucratized, and as the word suggests, they are in the third stage of social movements known as bureaucratization. This means that they have accumulated so much success that they now have a lot of political power, they have a lot of social power, they have a lot of influence. They are at this higher level of organization, and they don't have to rely on readily available volunteers. They don't have to rely on mass rallies or inspirational leaders to progress towards their goals. They're focused on coordinated strategies, and this is reflected in their new program, which is now underway. It's called the Country Specific Plans, and it stems from the recognition that government owned intervention strategies have very high capacities to bridge the divide between humanitarian and development responses. And moreover, their standards of quality and accountability in programming allows them to work with governments internally at that, and they also work with local donors and they work with partners to bring relief to the affected population. And all of this just reaffirms their status to be in the bureaucratization stage. We can better understand the WFP's ideologies through John McCarthy and Mayer Zolt's theory of resource mobilization, published in their paper in 1977. And this theory essentially rests on the premise that social movement organizations are dependent on one, obtaining resources, and 2, using resources. And there are 5 specified types. The first being material, second, human, social organizational, cultural, and moral. And unsurprisingly, the theory asserts that social movement organizations are more effective when they have access to these resources and are able to effectively use these resources. And looking at the WFP, we see that they have applied this framework quite religiously. Take a look at their 2019 annual report. This is a chart that I captured. 4.4 million metric tons of food delivered, 20 million kilometers flown by their aviation service, and this is just within the year. These numbers are massive, and they wouldn't be able to provide these resources to underserved communities without having a strong supply line. And when we examine that on a closer level, we see that not only do they have access to a lot of strong supply lines, but they also work with very diverse supply lines. For example, the WFP work with governments, with other nonprofits, they work with suppliers, and they work with local communities. They work with large businesses and they down to the small farmers. They then invest these resources back to local economies, markets, and private sectors, and this generates more resources. So you can see the trend. And using this framework, they have a lot of financial capacity, and it's estimated that they spent more than $2 billion in the countries where they operate. And along the way, they consistently managed to fill in gaps in their supply line to maintain this strong backbone. And examining this on an even closer level, not only do they have a lot of resources, they also manage it very well, right? They utilize these sub-elements within their supply chain called core operational functions and core support functions. For example, there's vendor management, where they enforce high standards for international food procurement through very rigorous vetting and inspection. There's food safety and quality to make sure that their beneficiaries have access to safe and high quality food. There's obviously very careful, very concise planning. There's food procurement, where they make sure they purchase the right food at the right time. There's logistic clusters, where they work together with other organizations to improve the logistics of responding to emergencies. They provide business support. They have risk insurance, where they develop and implement risk management and insurance programs to evolve their organizational needs. And as you can see, there's a lot of tactics here, a lot of tactics revolving around resources. And this all traces back to McCarthy and Zalt's theory, in that the WFP has so bureaucratically mobilized its resource. They are so controlling, they are so calculating, they are so effective at predicting costs, that they have this level of success, that they can implement all these objectives on this grand scale. So what exactly does the WFP do? Well, their work actually constitutes a pretty wide range of activities, so I think it's more appropriate to discuss them in terms of categories. The first is emergency relief, and this is pretty straightforward. They provide assistance to millions of people who are displaced by natural disasters or man-made cataclysmic events, and homeless people. The second is called cash and in kind, and this involves physical banknotes, vouchers, or electronic funds being given to beneficiaries to spend directly. And this has the benefit of flexibility because people can pretty much spend it in any given situation. The third is humanitarian support, and this constitutes the business side of the WFP. They pretty much offer competitive market rates, timely delivery, and cost efficiencies for their humanitarian partners so that in the face of tight funding and high expectations, the humanitarian community has a more streamlined process and more concentrated resources, allowing them to save more lives faster at a lower cost to donors and the environment. The next are two categories that I labeled together because I think they pretty much give out the same sentiment. The first is country capacity strengthening, and this is pretty much the program's way of offering technical assistance for countries in need, and they offer solutions that enhances that country's capacity for emergency preparedness, response, logistics, better supply chain management, strengthening their risk reduction capabilities, giving them stronger social safety nets, and overall fostering a climate of resilience. And while we're on the term, the word resilience in this context is defined by the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction as the ability of a system, community, or society exposed to hazards to resist, absorb, accommodate, and recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner, including through the preservation and restoration of its essential basic structures and functions. Pretty much, the WFP is developing more programs. They're developing very specific programs in giving an advantage to countries so they have better resilience for food security and nutrition. They have invested in early warning and preparedness systems, which includes supply chain management again, and emergency communications that allows these specific countries or governments to prevent crises or respond to them more quickly when they happen. The last is triangular South-South cooperation. This somewhat relates to the former category. South-South cooperation is a term used to refer to the development partners, countries, or international organizations providing financial or technical support to facilitate development activities between two developing countries. And in the case of the WFP, South-South cooperation is the direct exchange of knowledge, experience, skills, resources, and the technical know-hows among developing countries. And oftentimes they are assisted by a donor, and in this case it's the WFP. This is why it's called triangular, because it's two countries with a donor, which forms a triangular shape. This relationship may also take the form of funding or training, management, technological systems, or other types of support. They believe that this engagement process between three entities is a necessity as a reflection of global trends, because The cooperation between developing countries is pretty much expanding in terms of volume and scale, depending based on the 2015 report by the UN Secretary General on South-South cooperation. So, what do they do in practice in triangular South-South cooperation? The program pretty much responds to requests by developing country governments to help identify and package their national solutions in terms of food and nutrition programs and shares them with their peer countries. As discussed on the slide before, the WFP engages in a multitude of work, but we have to ask the question, is it meaningful? Is it impactful? Well, the fact that they won a 2020 Nobel Peace Prize should speak to some of their successes, right? They have provided food assistance to nearly 100 million people in more than 80 countries the past year. And in this large impact, they have successfully narrowed down and targeted vulnerable populations, and one of them being children. Their school meals have reached 17.3 million children. And last class, we learned about the importance of education as a means to escape poverty or for social mobility, whatever your intentions are. So by giving children access to nutritious meals, the program is help fostering an environment where children can better their lives directly through education. On any given day, there are 5,600 trucks, 30 ships, and nearly 100 planes delivering food globally. They are also the largest cash provider, and they gave 2.1 billion US dollars in 64 countries in 2019. And as we can tell, these are very objective results. We can tell these are solid numbers. We can see them. We can understand that this impact is making meaningful differences in people's lives. And with the pandemic we're in right now, we can actually see that the program is still making a positive impact. They're still effective in their work. Despite the pandemic, they are sustaining ongoing levels of assistance to beneficiaries across all WFP operations, and this is located in 80 countries. They are actually scaling up to reach additional beneficiaries. On the brink of acute food insecurity, they are continuing to support governments and responding to the needs of provisions of technical assistance, and they are continuing to enable the humanitarian and health response through their common services to make sure that the critical movement of personnel and COVID-19 cargo, despite supply chains disruption caused by the pandemic to keep moving. It's second nature for the WFP to respond to emergencies like these. And with everything that's going on in the world now, I think all of us can appreciate the amount of their work and the quality of their work that they're giving out to the general population. One prime element that makes the World Food Program successful is their implementation and frequent usage of a concept called impact evaluation. And what this term means, it's essentially an assessment of how their intervention strategies and their outcomes, whether these strategies are effective, whether they are intended or they're unintended, And this analysis provides a counterfactual of what those outcomes would have been if there wasn't any intervention. And the World Food Programme's commitment to impact evaluation helps them understand whether they are doing the right thing, whether they are achieving results, or whether they could do things differently. And they do this by testing multiple ways to obtain the same result and deem which is the most beneficial. And this implementation helps them accountable and helps them better understand the people they are serving. Because not only are they trying to change and trying to benefit the world just because, they're also analyzing themselves, a self reflection of some sort. And it helps them understand their weaknesses, their internal flaws. And this recognition of possible faults in the system, this accountability, is what makes the World Food Program stands out, and that's what makes them so successful, is the ability to accept that they could do better. As mentioned in the earlier slide, the WFP clearly has made massive contributions to the global population. And that begs the question, where do we go from here? Do we just sit and wait and hope that they continue to do their work and produce more change for society? How do we even begin to analyze and dissect an organization that has won the Nobel Peace Prize? Right? That speaks of their paramount success. Well, one thing that I can propose is maybe our nation can implement a kind of model, a kind of learning framework, so that the general population can have a better understanding of how the UN and how the WFP are working to remediate the problem of food insecurity. Because as it currently stands, if you go on both of these organizations' websites, it's quite frankly very overwhelming to look at. There's tabs and there's sub tabs, and then within their sub tabs there's pages of information, there's analytics, and there's annual reports, and it's a lot for the general population to process. So it might have the possibility of deterring people away from contributing. But say if we use an educational framework that's more accessible content wise, that's more aesthetically pleasing to the eye, where you're not bombarded with pages of social activism jargon, then maybe people will feel more inspired to partake in such activities, right? If we boil it down to the simplest concepts, to the bottom line, to the silver lining of it all, then maybe we can have a better opportunity to reach out to a larger demographic in society. But aside from that, I think that it's not always about proposing new things. It's not always about fixing. Because if the wheel works, why reinvent it, right? I mean, come on now. Like this organization literally won a Nobel Peace Prize. So maybe we don't have to critically dissect. We don't have to overanalyze and nitpick at everything. Sometimes it's about becoming inspired by the platform, realizing that this is working and this is what we have and this is what we should accept. And for me, I was inspired just to give out rice. And that act seems so small in form, but I know that its impact made a whole world of difference in someone's life. So what will you do? How will you mold your social environment to produce meaningful change for you, for your community?